dedicated to helping Floridians prosper since 1926. Seacoast offers the personal and business banking solutions customers need with the personalized service they deserve. More at seacoastbank.com/bank on better. Member FDIC.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, we're talking about the biggest stories of the week, starting with the firestorm of criticism over Jacksonville Mayor Donna Deegan's comments comparing former President Trump's mass deportation plans to concentration camps. Our panel of journalists is also discussing social media posts by an incoming school board member falsely claiming the government is manipulating the weather. Plus, a court says stand your ground applies to threats from pets, and St. Johns County's anti-panhandling lawsuit is challenged in court. We'll talk about all that and more on our Friday Weekend Review. Plus, some seriously good food awaits. Jack's Filipinos serves up the 7th annual Taste of the Philippines at Mosh. Want to join the conversation? Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on social. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The militant group Hamas confirms Israeli forces have killed its leader, Yahya Sinwar. But Hamas says the killings of several of its leaders won't stop its movement against Israel. President Biden is in Berlin for talks with European leaders. Esme Nicholson reports Biden and Germany's leader discussed the Hamas leader's death.
Speaking ahead of a bilateral with President Biden, Chancellor Olaf Scholz expressed hope for peace in the Middle East.
Mit dem Tod des Hamas-Anführers Sinwar,
saying, "We hope that with the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, there is now a real chance for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages." Biden reiterated that in his comments.
I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace.
For NPR News, I'm Esme Nicholson in Berlin.
In the U.S., former President Barack Obama campaigns for Vice President Harris in Tucson, Arizona today. He and former First Lady Michelle Obama are also set to join Harris on the campaign trail next week. As NPR's Tamara Keith reports, this is part of an effort to generate excitement among voters in key swing states.
Harris will be joined by former President Barack Obama for what the campaign says will be a major get-out-the-vote event in Georgia next Thursday. Michelle Obama will campaign with Harris in Michigan on Saturday, October 26th, the first day of early in-person voting in that key state. While the former president has held several solo rallies, this will be Michelle Obama's first time on the trail for the Harris-Walz campaign. Former President Bill Clinton is also out campaigning for Harris. Surrogates can serve as a force multiplier for campaigns, energizing volunteers and earning news coverage that can reach voters. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
A new study from Rutgers University shows many disabled voters in the U.S. are frustrated ahead of the November election. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports the findings show only 16% of U.S. polling sites are accessible to people with disabilities.
Dom Kelly is the CEO of New Disabled South. He says the U.S. population is aging and both presidential candidates need to take the disabled voting bloc seriously.
How much of an impact will 40 million eligible voters have in this race? They will have an enormous impact. That is half the voters that voted for President Biden in 2020.
The study shows disabled voters can face a number of hurdles, including polling stations that don't meet ADA guidelines, transportation issues, and not having proper access to campaign materials. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
On Wall Street and pre-market trading, Dow futures are lower. This is NPR.
It's now 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Jacksonville-based CSX announces its operating income for this year's third quarter was $1.35 billion, $80 million more than the same period last year. And during an investors' conference call on Wednesday, CSX executives said net earnings were $66 million higher than the same quarter last year. But CSX Chief Financial Officer Sean Pelkey says Hurricane Helene's impact on its North and South Carolina operations was big, as much as $15 million, and expected to grow.
It appears the fourth quarter storm-related impacts will be larger than Q3, with a current estimate of around $50 million. That includes storm recovery and rerouting costs near $20 million, as well as roughly $30 million of net revenue impacts. Additionally, a significant rebuild process is already underway for miles of track and multiple bridges.
Pelkey estimates it could take more than a year and at least $200 million to rebuild what was destroyed in Hurricane Helene. Nearly 90,000 tabletop fire pits are under recall after flames shooting out from them resulted in a handful of serious burn injuries. The Colson-branded fire pits burned liquid alcohol. To date, the Consumer Product Safety Commission says it's received 31 reports of flames escaping from these fire pits, resulting in 19 burn injuries. It is 55 degrees, low 70s today in Jacksonville.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Solidigm, focused on making solid-state storage optimized for performance and efficiency. Solidigm believes a new era in AI requires a new approach to data storage. StorageForAI.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our Week in Review. Among our topics, a concentration camp comparison puts Jacksonville's mayor in conservative crosshairs. A Jacksonville school official spreads hurricane misinformation on social media. A Florida court says residents can stand their ground against animals. Homeless advocates challenge an anti-panhandling law in St. Johns County, even as advocates drop a similar case in Duval. And a contractor escapes the ultimate punishment in a high-profile death penalty case. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by A.G. Gankarski, Northeast Florida correspondent for Florida Politics. Good morning, A.G.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. Also joined by Megan Malacote, education reporter with Jacksonville Today. Hey, Megan.
Good morning.
Rich Donnelly, anchor and reporter at First Coast News. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Ann.
And Steve Patterson, reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, Ann. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Well, this comment sure got a lot of attention. Let's start off by hearing what Mayor Donna Deegan had to say in an interview with Times Radio in London this week.
Jacksonville and the United States as a whole is we are a community and a nation of immigrants, and I would hope that people would say yes, we absolutely must fix the broken immigration system. Let's pass a tough border law, but to put people in what would really amount to a concentration camp type situation to round them out of the country doesn't seem to me to be a very American thing to do.
AG, break this down for us. What is happening with the reaction to this comment?
You know, the Republicans are outraged. I mean, TK Waters, the Florida GOP, multiple members of City Council. I'm hearing there's going to be a resolution condemning the mayor's comments that's going to be filed. I would look for that. And, you know, it's kind of like what Nixon said to David Frost in his epilogue interview a few years after he got pushed into presidency. I gave my enemy a sword and they used it. And that's what Deegan did here. She created an unforced error on a city trade mission, you know, where she's representing the city, trying to bring jobs back, you know, trying to get an international flight and all of that. And, you know, she gets baited into this interview. And she starts talking about concentration camps, which has led people, you know, to say, well, she, you know, talking about Japanese internment camps, things like that. But for many people, especially those with, you know, Jewish heritage, with, you know, families that may have been liquidated in those camps, in Germany. It draws unwelcome and scary parallels to Nazi Germany. I mean, she's playing fast and loose with language at the very least. And saying that stuff when she's on the city dime over there. I mean, basically like, imagine saying that during, a hurricane briefing or something like this. Same deal. You're on a business trip. And, she, said that stuff, basically boosting, her preferred presidential candidate, making cases about, President Trump. And she has every right to do that at a political rally as something where she's off the clock. But, the gimmick behind all these trips, whether it's Alvin Brown, Lenny Curry, or her, is that it is strictly business, to quote EPMD. And, when you're talking about, concentration camps, talking about geopolitics, and using city resources to talk about, Donald Trump's comments, it really blurs the lines between the political side of Deegan, which, if this were funded by a political committee, no problem. If Donna Duval was funding his trip, no problem. If some donor was funding it, no problem. But, when it comes out of taxpayers' pockets, you're supposed to be consensus mayor, she did not present a consensus position. And basically, she ended up also beclowning a lot of her, political allies who defended her, basically saying, well, she didn't really mean that. The mayor is dedicated to love and inclusion and all these things. I've got a column about this next week in Jacksonville Today talking about this issue. But it really casts a dark shadow over her trip to the UK and to this mission. And it raises questions going forward about what mayors should be doing when they're overseas, and should they be giving interviews that have something to do with, outside of their lane, because, nobody in England needed to know what Donna Deegan thought about Donald Trump's immigration policies.
You talk about the venue being inappropriate, and that's interesting. I haven't heard that raised in the concerns from the various people who have objected to it, particularly. The Jacksonville sheriff was actually one of the first to weigh in on this. Let's hear what he had to say.
It's almost a comparison to the horrific things that took place in Nazi Germany and across the world in World War II to an issue where people actually come into the country illegally and dealing with an issue that everyone in America knows is a real issue. And to hear that was just pretty shocking. So I felt like I should say something.
So to that, AG, I mean, these people who've been attacking the mayor for these comments have been very much, look, don't call me a Nazi. That's an unfair comparison. You're bringing up, a history that doesn't apply in this situation, more than is it appropriate for someone, on a mission for a business and such.
Well, the state legislators who objected actually did bring up the taxpayer-funded element, and also some other Republicans did. Sheriff Waters did not. And, Donald Trump, he talked about immigrants poisoning the blood, which is what the official statement from City Hall that attempted to do cleanup on the comments referenced. But this is really, again, something that should have been, this should not have been the story coming out of London. The story coming out of London should have been the trade mission, should have been, they had the 32-0 owner's approval of the stadium deal. That was a big deal for about 18 hours. Now it's, what's really a concentration camp. This is not a discussion that's in Jacksonville's interest to have, but it's one that was invited solely by the mayor, who, decided to go on an international radio show and say something for foreign consumption. I mean, keep this in mind. We had a revolution against the British. We are not British subjects. So she goes on foreign radio and, honestly disgraces Jacksonville with these comments. It was a dark day.
We've got a call from Anthony in Arlington. Good morning, Anthony. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I was just wondering, how could those comments be so disgraceful when I turn on my radio and hear some very inflammatory things come from the Republican Party? Now, I don't understand, you say it's on the city's dime, but I mean, any public official, I don't care who's paying for the spot, shouldn't say some of the things that I hear on a daily basis. I think she was just voicing an opinion, answering a question.
Thanks, Anthony. I mean, Steve, to Anthony's point, Donald Trump has certainly, called people fascists before, including his opponent, Kamala Harris. The language, though, of a concentration camp has obviously a different kind of resonance than just a label of that kind. But it was interesting, there was a lot of opposition, but a local rabbi, Novak of the Shabbat at the town center, said that, this was an advisable language. He thought it was regrettable, but he also allowed that people make mistakes.
Right. And I think this certainly does count as an unforced error. If she had said internment camp, that would have been something that would have irritated many of the same people who are angry now, but she could say justifiably, we're talking about the proposal is to have the largest deportation effort in American history. That is going to involve concentrating people somewhere and interning them because we don't have like transporter bays. We got to put people somewhere. So the language, that difference of one word, made a big impact. But it also, I think, reflects the way that people in government in elected positions are each being called on by their parties to step in and express views that are consistent with their broader political allegiances.
Got a call from Ed at NAS. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. I think that the use of either concentration camp or internment is a mistake. Those two type of camps were not to temporarily hold people, but to hold them and or expel them to the original country, is to hold them in a permanent basis, or for nefarious reasons like the Nazis did. What is the difference between what the Biden-Harris administration is doing now when they're deporting people, which they are doing every day, to the original country? And, of course, Trump has a record of doing that already, so this is not something new. They're going to be the same process that both administrations use, just in a larger scale. This is not a new thing. Might be in a larger area type of situation, but not different than what they're doing now. Nobody's going to put them in a concentration camp or in jail for years and months. That defeats the purpose, which is to deport and to save taxpayer money.
Gotcha, Ed. Thanks so much for your comment. Megan, it did seem that the mayor, maybe even in real time, was doing a little bit of trying to walk back the comment, because after the interviewer asked her a follow-up, she said basically, well, what's a concentration camp? It's a concentration of people in a camp. Maybe not the way that you and I would ordinarily define that, but maybe was making that realization that maybe that was a bridge too far.
Kind of processing it in real time. Sure. I think you have two basic options, right? When politicians speak and want to walk it back, you can either apologize and completely walk it back, or you can stand your ground and dig in. Or Deacon probably chose that middle gray area of sort of walk it back, but sort of stand your ground.
Mm-hmm. Rich, so far she's been unapologetic, but we'll see if that changes when she gets back, or is in town and kind of meeting with the local press corps and her colleagues.
Well, and that's the thing. We've talked about the difference of words in her actions. Had she said detention facility or temporary housing location, this doesn't get picked up. But the term concentration camp is so charged. And all of us going through middle school, high school, college in America, you learn about those things. It's just a term that garners so many emotions for so many different people about, as Steve, you pointed out, a much broader situation, a very nefarious issue. I am curious, though. She has been actively campaigning for Kamala Harris. We've seen it on the West Side with housing initiatives, where she stands in front of a Harris Waltz placard at a podium mentioning Harris. But to AG's point, the people consuming that radio show outside of now regurgitated in Jacksonville can't vote for any of the candidates in our presidential election. So there's sort of an odd, why do you bring this up? Because so oftentimes we've all spoken to politicians and they'll say, when there's an off-topic question, oh, excuse me, but we're only trying to talk about this issue at this time, maybe at a different time. Like, there's a time and a place for that. And to AG's point, she's there to talk about bringing business back to Jacksonville through football diplomacy. and this was wildly off topic for her trip.
We've got a call from Leah in San Marco. Go ahead, Leah.
Yes. Hi, good morning. I'm a member of the Jewish community in Jacksonville. I was catching up on this story and had a lot of people text me about it. I am very much in support of Mayor Deegan's statement. I'm seeing the comments that it's shocking and appalling and inappropriate that she would say this, but what I find shocking and appalling and inappropriate is we have a presidential candidate who is saying he will do these things. So to call it out seems like a good idea to me. And why aren't all the folks who are angry about her statement angry about a presidential candidate wanting to do that to people in this country, to treat them inhumanely, to say they are eating our pets, to treat them like animals and call them animals? That is what is inhumane and inappropriate. So I'm very grateful that Mayor Deegan spoke up, and I don't think there's ever a wrong time or a wrong place to speak out for humanity and to speak out for the safety of everyone in this country, regardless of their immigration status.
Thanks, Leah. AG, is it, hypocritical in, when you're talking about a candidate who's known for particularly inflammatory language and statements? Is Donna Deegan being held to kind of a higher standard in terms of addressing the intent and the comments of somebody like former President Trump?
No. And I think that's kind of a false canard. And I think the caller used a lot of campaign language in making her points. I mean, it's like Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis does official press conferences on the most boring topics ever. And he finds a way to talk about Joe Biden, the vice president. Finds a way to talk about this, that, or other with policy. And that is an abuse in official resources. And, we see it in Steve's publication. We see it on Rich's TV show. We see it all over the place where the governor does not stay in his lane. He used his office to campaign for higher office, like basically starting from jump. He got reelected and he immediately started running for president. And I would say that Donna Deegan has Ron DeSantis syndrome. Different hair, sure. Different elevated shoes, sure, but the same abuse of power and the same, reckless use of platform to, address topics that are far beyond the state mission. And the mission over there is very limited. Bring jobs, get that international flight that you promised, fulfill on these things. Don't try to make news and stunt, basically. It's like when we had Calvin Ridley here on the Jaguars last year and he kept running the wrong route. Respectfully, the mayor ran the wrong route. And those who've watched Jaguars games for the last year and a half know what that looks like.
Got a call from Sally in Springfield. Good morning, Sally. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to point out that the story coming from this instance is that a female politician is being held to a different standard than our current Republican politician who's running for the presidency. He has said so many inflammatory things. And like a previous caller said, this is about what he has said. I just think she needs to be given a little more grace. She's an honest politician. She wants to answer questions that people pose to her, not be hidden, not be not be telling the wrong thing or trying to trick people. I don't know if I applaud her words, but I understand her comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We also have a comment from Tom on Facebook. He says, a concentration camp is not the same as a death camp, nor does it necessarily refer to the Holocaust. Remember, she was answering a question about immigration during an interview. We also have a call from Mark on the West Side. Go ahead, Mark.
Good morning. Of course, I always agree with what AG says, and I agree basically with what he said, but good Lord, I could care less about this. My wife is Jewish, and she could care less about this either. This is, AG was right. She should have said it, and oh my God, woe is me. But my point is, what in the heck is the sheriff doing weighing in on anything political? Has crime been solved in Jacksonville for the interim? Are we crime free? And he's weighing in on political opinions. He should just say, pass. That's not my pay grade, and I'm going to go bust bad guys. What is he saying anything about this for?
Thanks for the call. We also have an email from Faye. She says, just to let you know, perhaps feathers are ruffled, but she spoke her truth. The emperor has no clothes. He can say whatever he wants about people eating cats, but anybody else, it's a problem.
Donald Trump is not on the taxpayer payroll right now. Donna Deegan is. She makes good money. She has a comm staff that all makes good money. All of them come out of local media. They know better. They know what they did, and they know crisis management, and they're not managing this crisis. And, honestly, if I were on the city council, I would reconsider using any city funds to send the mayor overseas on one of these missions going forward, using this as a precedent. They've been controversial since jump, and, this establishes why. And, this is just like when Lenny Curry during a press conference, made some defense of Donald Trump, getting out of the Paris Climate Accords. And, the whole media raised holy heck about that. And, they didn't show him grace, and it wasn't because Lenny Curry was a male politician versus a female politician. The fact is that gender is a construct, and all these politicians, all these people making big money off taxpayers, off of escalating millage rates, need to be held to the same standard.
Mark on the west side. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead. You there, Mark?
I like him.
Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. Amy in Orange Park. Amy, you there?
Hello?
Hey, Amy, go ahead.
So, yeah, I just wanted to also remind people that this part of this just falls back on, when Trump is in the political scene, this negative attention is going to follow him everywhere. Yes, she misspoke. Maybe she used the wrong words. But part of this is, a radio show in London is following the chaos of our national election, and it's going to continue if Trump gets elected, because this is what happens when Trump's in office. It's chaos on top of chaos on top of more chaos.
Thank you, Amy. I do want to kind of move on to some other topics, but if you're just joining us, we are talking about the week's top headlines. I'm here with Megan Malakote, Steve Patterson, Rich Donnelly, and A.G. Gankarski. Megan, I want to move on to a story that you covered this week. It is about misinformation or disinformation about the recent storms. Catch us up on what happened.
Yeah, so incoming school board member Tony Ricardo, he was elected in August for District 1's rep. He'll be sworn in next month. He spent a lot of time between the two hurricanes posting hurricane-related content that pushed a lot of misinformation, talking about how the government controls the weather, and Hurricane Helene was targeted to go where it did so that it could ruin Asheville for various purposes, and how Florida received Milton also for various reasons, I suppose. So he just spent a lot of time talking about how the government was behind the weather. And then when some of his followers or commenters in the community kind of pushed back, he dug his heels in and just kind of doubled down and said, no, this is really what's happening. You people need to do your research, type of thing.
Yeah. This was on Facebook, not necessarily organic posts, things he was reposting.
Reposting mostly, usually with a comment that added to it of his own.
And you reached out to him. We should say we also reached out to him this morning just to let him know we'd be discussing it, as we reached out to Mayor Donna Deegan this morning. I mean, just to be transparent. But he was originally going to talk to you?
Yeah, he was originally going to talk to me, and then I texted him to tell him I was about to call, and he said, sorry, no, I can't talk, and then he hasn't responded since.
Okay. This is not the first time that he's made headlines, Rich Donnelly. He previously had caused some concern for anti-LGBTQ posts that people in the community took issue with.
Well, and especially in a charged political climate like we have right now with government interference in public education, knowing that he's going to be an incoming school board member and overseeing what could be viewed as now the rules, so to speak, in talking about that. It's a really charged issue for a lot of people, knowing that, okay, well, he's going to be overseeing what policy is in terms of education. And I do want to just go back to the weather side of things. Some of our meteorologists at First Coast News have received questions, well, how come you aren't talking about this? And people with decades of experience forecasting for Florida and Jacksonville specifically, and the tropics as a whole, we can't talk about a hurricane that doesn't exist. Like, what the cone of concern, would you rather trust someone with 40 years experience in Jacksonville or from someone reposting a tweet from someone's basement that doesn't have actual weather experience?
The people who are saying that there is a hurricane coming when your meteorologists are saying that's not the
Yeah,
case
that it's
at
not
this
true at
point.
all. Yes, some of the the fake pictures of hurricane cones, and they would say, "Well, Nadine is here," and it was, no, it's not. Like and I would talk with some of our meteorologists, and they're at their wits' end about something like that because they're looking at the radar and like, listen, we weren't in a boat out in the Atlantic. I can't say beyond a shadow of a doubt it's not there, but trust us, it's not. And it's infuriating from their perspective to be in a he said, she said with someone with zero weather experience, but reposting on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, Steve, you've covered environmental issues for decades. It's sort of interesting that people are reacting to extreme weather events and looking to something else as the cause. I mean, they don't want to acknowledge human-caused climate change, but they believe in human-directed climate disasters.
This actually did puzzle me. I was thinking about congressional debate some years ago where people spoke about how it was basically arrogant to suggest that humans could affect something as vast as the climate, and basically like that God had created a system, and that people were too finite to have any real impact on that. And that's a point of view. But this one is talking about being able to manipulate specific weather systems. It's like saying, all right, we're not capable of having an impact on a broad scale, but we can like hit a hole in one from 600 yards away.
AG, I mean, it's a difficult time when it comes to misinformation. I mean, Rich Donnelly says, our meteorologists are like, trust us. And that's really kind of the thing that seems to be most lacking.
Yeah, I mean, we have better weather information we ever had before. We have better reconnaissance, better radars, better tracks, better spaghetti models, more predictive, and the science has been refined. Tony Ricardo's comments were an abomination, and let's consider why Tony Ricardo has a platform in the first place. Why we're even talking about him. Moms for Liberty candidate, Ron DeSantis endorsed candidates. So, Governor Storm basically endorsed this kook, who gets in, passes on conspiracy theories like a boomer on Facebook. It's appalling. It raises questions about the governance of our public schools, as if we needed more questions about that, given things like which school do we close, the Hunger Games for the schools that are, neighborhoods that are popular and all of that. And you've got Tony Ricardo making pivotal decisions coming up in a month on this and many more, curriculum, all of that. It raises serious questions. It'll continue to drive the exodus to private schools, to charter schools, to things like that, because, if 1/7 decision-making is made by somebody who's anti-science, who is pro-meme, who is, pushing inflammatory rhetoric on issue after issue, with the idea, and let's be real about this, school board is basically a farm team for larger politics. Your school board member today is going to be your city council candidate tomorrow, or your state house candidate, or God forbid, your state senate candidate. And, so you've got to consider these comments in this context. Tony Ricardo, is, pushing, false information. He's unaccountable for it. Megan tried to talk to him about it right before the show, and he chickened out. And, I got blowback just 15 minutes ago for talking about Mayor Deegan. Well, Tony Ricardo, as far as I know, identifies as a male, and his comments are every bit as asinine, if not more so, than Donna Deegan's.
Megan, what kind of reaction are you hearing from since you published this? Because there are people who have concerns about somebody who doesn't recognize accepted science being in charge, as AG says, of student curriculum to some extent.
Right. And I think that's an important point because this is not one of my favorite things to talk about because social media to me is not news, but what makes this news is who posted, right? So to AG's point, Tony Ricardo has a platform because he's an incoming school board member and because he'll be voting on, say, science curriculum. here in a few months. That's what makes it news. And so I think that the community is just kind of flabbergasted is probably too strong of a word, but at least caught off guard by his apparent beliefs, because he's going to have this position of power over 100,000 children in the Jacksonville area very soon. One of the most interesting things that I took away from reporting this story was the idea that social media doesn't create the conspiracies, it just gives them kind of a pot to brew in. And so I talked to a conspiracy theory expert from the University of Louisville. His name is Adam Enders. And the reason I talked to him, the reason I called him, was because when I was working on reporting the story, came across his research, his peer-reviewed journal publications, and he had found that social media itself didn't necessarily make a person more conspiratorial. So my initial thought was, well, is it because Tony Ricardo spends so much time on Facebook that he's become, kind of following the patterns that you see throughout Facebook of these types of posts? And Ender's research, I guess, has shown that it's not really something that's going to make you more conspiratorial to use social media, but it will give it a platform to amplify things that you already believe in.
Interesting. Got a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. It's kind of bizarre, but typical. All the people that are global warming isn't real, global warming isn't real, global warming isn't real. Oh, the hurricanes are here from global warming? Well, it must be the government's fault. The government did it. That's who did it. It's the government's killing us with hurricanes now. It's just so absurd and ridiculous. It's almost, I really question people's actual intelligence.
Daryl, thanks so much. We also have a call from Ricky on the north side. Go ahead, Ricky.
Yes, my question is, why are we following so many climate deniers? We have Trump saying, drill, baby, drill, baby. It's the cause of people that are irresponsible in what's happening to our environment. So my question is, why are we denying people, scientists, experts, that there's an actual climate change? That's my question.
Ricky, I think that's maybe a rhetorical question. I mean, it is a question that people do ask, and I'm not certain any of us have the answer to that.
I don't think so. One thing I do think is interesting about the school board race is that coming up on November's election, Amendment 1 deals with bipartisan and partisan elections for school board candidates. And it's been on the Florida books for almost 20 years at this point to have school board races as nonpartisan elections. But I'd be curious to know if Mr. Ricardo would have been elected had he necessarily had a little R next to his name as a partisan candidate. It's one thing to be endorsed by certain people prior to voters going into the voting box. But then when you're there, you don't necessarily have all of the information in front of you of who's endorsed who or who is represented by whatever. It's just simply one name and a second name in those specific races.
We have a message from Susie on Facebook. She says, I'm a boomer and you just offended me. I do not pass on conspiracy theories, which I think it's fair to say that that's not necessarily generational. I don't think Mr. Ricardo is a boomer per se. He's, I think, pre-boom, post-boom.
Right on the border.
On the border of the
He's
boom.
mid-60s.
Is he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then that makes him a boomer.
Point taken, though. Also, Lisa on Facebook says, Tony Ricardo shows a stunning degree of ignorance and conspiracy belief. It is astounding that he will be involved in any way in education, and alarming that it will be as a member of the school board. I think we're going to probably just slide on here. But, an interesting topic, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, Megan, once he's actually in office.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if you're just joining us, we're talking about the big headlines of the week with our panel of journalists. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social, as many are doing. I want to talk, Rich, about a case that you've been covering, the death penalty case of a contractor who was accused of murdering a client. This just wrapped up yesterday. Catch us up on what happened.
Yeah, so Corey Binderum, a contractor in Clay County, took $12,000 from his client, Susan Malden, This was back in 2019 to renovate her bathroom. He had actually previously done work on her kitchen as well. So this was a contractor who she had a relationship with to a degree, at least professionally. And some of her friends had testified that he did good work on the kitchen, the bathroom, 6 months, no movement. And then the day before, she told a friend that she was going to report him to the police for taking her money and not doing anything. She was killed. And her body was found in a dump in Georgia 3 months later. Well, this past Monday, he was convicted of murdering Susan Malden, and just yesterday afternoon, a jury sentenced him to life in prison by a 7-5 vote. 7 people for the death penalty, 5 for life in prison, and under the new Florida statutes, an 8-4 majority is required for death. So he will spend the rest of his life in prison for the murder of his former client.
Yeah. Steve Patterson, this is predicated on changes in Florida's death penalty law, which you have reported on previously. After the Parkland massacre, the state legislature changed the rules. A lot of people were upset that that 11-1 verdict resulted in Nicholas Cruz not getting the death penalty, which they thought he deserved. And so now the law, as Rich says, is you just need 8 people in favor of death in order to but they didn't meet that threshold in this case. It certainly is changing dynamics in the courtroom, though, when it comes to death penalty cases.
It is, and it's interesting. There's always a point where you have to draw a line. As just this interesting case where you can see that there is someone out there. I don't know who the 5th person was who supported life, but whoever that person was, that creates the same situation that people were decrying in the requirement of a unanimous decision, where you could have one person who could say, no, I am fundamentally against giving this man a death sentence, so I get the final say. Well, that's what we had here. We had 4 people who were on board with life, and someone had to be number 5. I don't know who it was, but it just struck me as interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. This jury, Megan, reached its guilt verdict. You know, there's these 2 phases: the guilt phase, and then kind of the penalty phase to decide the sentence. They decided in just 4 hours that he was guilty, but those guilt verdicts, have to be unanimous, right? They have to be 12-0, or in some cases in Florida for lesser criminal cases 6-0. But not so in capital cases, and that is a big change. It's changed the way attorneys approach these cases. It's changed the way that they're defended at the same time.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's top headlines. We are here with our panel of journalists, and we would love to hear from you if you want to give us a call. I want to move on to a topic of panhandling. There was a lawsuit that was dropped in Jacksonville against a sort of anti-panhandling type law the same day that a lawsuit was filed in St. Johns County. Steve, and you've covered this because you're the king of federal court filings. I don't know that anybody ever picks up on these things like you do, but this simultaneity is interesting, right? And I don't know why the Jacksonville lawsuit was dropped. So enlighten us a little bit.
I honestly wish I knew a little bit more about the decision making that the law firm handling this used, but we have a nonprofit law firm, the Florida Justice Institute, that has been handling a lawsuit against the city of Jacksonville for an ordinance the city council passed in 2023.
Yeah.
And it was something that restricted any sort of interaction between people standing on the side of the road at intersections and someone in a vehicle. The vehicle, I think, in order for interaction to happen, had to be parked and stopped. And so this was seen. It was voted on in Jacksonville as a step to reduce pedestrian fatalities. Although and Jacksonville has a significant number of pedestrian fatalities, no question, but there are many other ways you could try to reduce those as well.
And so the lawsuit that was brought in Jacksonville basically said this is kind of a freedom of speech issue,
Correct.
a due process issue, because they felt it was targeting homeless people.
And in fact, that's been the whole premise of this. That lawsuit was filed on behalf of another nonprofit, an organization called the COSAC Foundation, that produces and distributes a newspaper called The Homeless Voice. People stand on street corners, and when you stop at a traffic light, they will come out and hand you a copy of The Homeless Voice and seek donations. And this would make that interaction criminal, or make it unacceptable.
And that law's been
And-
in place. There was no injunction of it, right? I mean,
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
And actually, the same law firm, the Florida Justice Institute, was representing the COSAC Foundation in cases here, as well as in Lake City and against Columbia County, and all of those were actually filed in Jacksonville's federal court. And so
this case, though, it's filed in St. Johns County, similar premise, in terms of the constitutional claims. So we don't know why the Jacksonville case was dropped the same day that this one was filed in St. Johns County.
I don't have a stated reason for this. I simply thought the timing of it was quite striking. The other two cases that were handled for the COSAC Foundation, those have been essentially resolved. So they'll get less details worked out in the next few weeks. The one thing that is different in this St. Johns County case is that, first, it's a different ordinance, yes, but many of the arguments are very similar. But in this case, in St. Johns County, the firm is representing actual humans, actual St. Johns County residents
Plaintiffs
who say, I panhandle at times to supplement my income. Say, I'm disabled. I have to panhandle to have some way to put
Were
food
these
on the
people who were actually arrested?
One mentioned having been, I think he was simply fined.
Okay.
But there's a graduated process, and there's where you're simply.
But this is not theoretical, like it might infringe on our rights. These are people who are saying that they've already been infringed on. Yeah.
Correct.
AG, I want to ask you, you get around town a lot, you walk around town a lot. Have you noticed a diminishment in panhandling? And we should be clear, the one in Jacksonville was primarily major road intersections where it prohibited this, as opposed to just, street corners more centrally located. But have you noticed any change since the law went into effect in 2023?
I have not noticed a change. It's interesting. I have noticed a change in the unhoused population writ large, especially in Riverside, places like 5 Point, something like that. You're seeing an influx, and you do get panhandling there. But the intersection panhandling, I don't think the law is particularly effective. Similarly to the state law against homeless camping, you still see homeless people camping. You still see them sleeping out. And, I've talked about this too, where the city's response to that is insufficient to satisfy the state law. But, it's like the old saying, hard cases make bad law. We have some defective laws with holes in them on these issues. And, the legal challenges to them will be forthcoming because, I think, you've got questions about it, and you have these laws that are intended to make people feel better. And while they theoretically make people feel better, they seem to have real problems with enforcement and, real problems with clarity.
I just want to move on finally to this issue of stand your ground with animals or with pets, Rich. This is a kind of typically Florida case in a lot of ways, it seems, but there was a man who had killed a pit bull when he and his chihuahua felt threatened. A three-judge panel said that the lower court judge inappropriately said stand your ground doesn't apply. It's got to go back to the lower court. The judge has to consider that it does apply if somebody feels that they need to use deadly force against an animal. So it's opening a door that hadn't been opened in Florida.
Well, he was initially charged with animal cruelty, I believe, for
Right.
shooting the pit bull, and he was defending presumably himself and his property, as animals are viewed as property. Some of us who allow our miniature German Shepherds to sleep in their bed from time to time might view them as family members, but that's neither here nor there. While some people might think this goes too far, there was also in Putnam County a mail carrier who was tragically killed by
A
someone,
pack of
a pack
dogs.
of dogs. We're opening up Pandora's box with arming civil servants in that, but it is.
The First Coast Free Thought Society presents a Zoom screening of Rob Reiner's documentary about the rise of Christian nationalism, God and Country, followed by a conversation. Monday, October 21st, 6:30 p.m. More at fcfs.org.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
On the next Florida Roundup, the cost of catastrophe. The tab for Hurricanes Helene and Milton will be in the billions of dollars. Some will be covered by insurance, and some won't. The storms are just the latest reminders of the high cost of insurance. Are you filing a claim for storm damage? How much do you pay for coverage? And are you confident you know it's covered? Email us now, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
You can hear covers of Tom Petty's songs on the Apple TV series Bad Monkey, and his classic album Long After Dark has been reissued. On the next Fresh Air, we'll hear our interview with Tom Petty. Also Sterling Harjo, co-creator of the TV series Reservation Dogs. He's a recipient of this year's MacArthur Fellowship. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
With time running out, Donald Trump tries to distance himself from the states that have all but banned abortion.
They're too tough, and those are going to be redone.
Kamala Harris admits the race is tight, but says she has the edge.
I'm going to win. I'm going to win.
Plus, what you need to know about Click to Cancel and a 6-year journey to Jupiter, all on the Friday News Roundup. That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, one of the best meals of my life ever was prepared by a Filipino family that made a delicious traditional meal. And so I'm psyched. It's Filipino American History Month here, and there is some seriously good food on tap. Here to give us a preview of the 7th Annual Taste of the Philippines at Mosh next Thursday is Agnes Lopez, board member with Jack's Filipinos. Hey, Agnes.
Hi.
Also joined by Linny Rose Mugsino.
Yes.
Sorry, of the Perfect Pair Catering and Lola's Food Truck,
Yes.
which is a hugely popular. Start us off, if you will, Chef. What is on tap at this event? What kind of food will people be able to taste?
So we are going to feature 7 chefs this year, and we're going to be serving authentic Filipino food, and we'll be featuring dishes from our selected provinces. So it will be personalized dishes based on the chef's personalized provinces that they came from.
Yeah.
So for me, I picked jardinera, which is has a Spanish influence. So it's our version of meatloaf, and it's jardinera means gardener, and so the dish will look so colorful with peppers, some carrots. So it's very colorful dish. It's almost like a meatloaf, and it's a very unique take on meatloaf because it's very intricate, and you can. We usually serve it during festivals or special holidays because it takes quite some time to make it.
Oh,
It's a
really?
process, yes.
So in that way, probably very different than the meatloaf that we're accustomed to.
Yes, it will be different.
Yeah, awesome. Agnes, tell us a little bit about this event. I mean, what is the goal? Who is the intended audience?
It is basically the Jacksonville community. I'm a board member of Jack's Filipinos, and our goal is to bring Filipino culture to Jacksonville through art, education, and community outreach.
Yeah, and so how long have you been around?
Our organization's been around for a year. However, I am the founder of Taste of the Philippines, and we've been doing that for 7 years.
Okay. And is this regional exploration that Lenny was talking about, has that always been a part of this festival?
Yeah, originally when we started, we wanted to educate people about the Philippines. The Philippines has over 7,000 islands, so a lot of people don't realize, the different foods and culture is very different. So, like when you say Filipino food, everyone is familiar with lumpia and pancit, which is our favorites, but there is so much more, and that's kind of why I started this event, is to share more of that. And even Filipino Americans, we only know what our parents make, and it's very interesting to learn about the different regions and different types of food. Some islands are more seafood, some islands are more spicy, so it's a lot of fun and fascinating to learn about.
Yeah, it's a real complexity that you're right. I think I and most people don't think about. We kind of lump it all together. How large is the Filipino American population here in Jacksonville?
Jacksonville is the largest Filipino population in the Southeast. I believe the last census, it was about 35,000, but that was back in 2021. So it I'm sure has grown since then.
Yeah, and so have you seen your membership also grow in that time?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've only been around for a year, and I think we're about 5,000 members. So, yes.
Yeah. And Chef Lenny, what is the setup for this event? Like, I know that you do Lola's food truck, but this is not a food truck event.
It is not a food truck event. It will, all of the chefs will have its own area or table that we will be featuring a tasting for.
This is at Mosh.
At Mosh,
Yeah.
yes, at Mosh.
And so, do people kind of buy tickets and then just amble about? And
Yes, buy a ticket, and you have to buy a ticket now because we're selling the ticket really fast.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We sell out every
Yeah.
year.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's terrific. And just briefly, so any advice for people who are exploring Filipino food for the first time?
So come in hungry because you're gonna be tasting a lot of food. So it will be a taste like a tasting size, but for all the 7 chefs that were providing all the food, it will be a lot to explore and to experience and to try.
Excellent. Well, the 7th Taste of the Philippines happens Thursday, October 24th. It's from 6 to 10, and it's at Mosh. Agnes, where can people get tickets?
Online.
Okay.
And I also wanted to quickly mention we do have a special exhibit, the Filipino threaded traditions that we're that is kind of the backdrop of Taste of the Philippines. It will be there from all this month as well as November, and a lot of people don't know. Again, we're through that education. It's the Philippines is known for their weaving textiles. This is a pre-colonial art. And we're so excited to have these curated pieces that will be displayed at the event.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here, Agnes and Lenny both. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right. And that's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at wjct.org. And if you missed anything, you can either catch our rebroadcast or find us on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to listen Saturday at 4 when neurologist Dr. Joe Servin talks to the physician behind hip-hop stroke. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Tidbits, family owned and operated since 1985. Open for dine-in, delivery, and takeout at 3 locations: Bay Meadows, Hendricks, and Mandarin. Fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups. Order online, menu, and newsletter at claristidbits.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Donald Trump courts the female vote. Kamala Harris